My ex-girlfriend. There was this girl I dated for 5 years. 5 years seems like a long time, but for better or worse, the time passes in a flash. After around 4 years of dating, she started to talk about getting married. When we'd first started seeing each other, I did tell her that I wanted to get married in the future. She must have taken my word for granted and thought we were getting married for real. But at the time she'd asked me to marry her, I'd only just graduated from university. I still didn't have a proper job sorted, and I was floating between part-time work. How could I possibly marry someone when I had no job or proper future plans? She said she would work as well, but to me that just wasn't good enough. Until my life was on track, it was irresponsible of me to marry someone and have kids. I wanted to make sure my children would have a good life. I tried to explain my position to her, but she wouldn't listen. If we love each other, why don't we just marry? Isn't that all that matters? Ironically, it was this argument between us that led to the breakup. We just couldn't come to an agreement, and I ended up leaving her. It was half a year after that when I next talked to her. She had called me. She was crying, and she told me that she wanted to get back together with me. "I still love you," she cried. But it was too late by then. You may think that I'm an asshole, but the last time I'd seen her was 6 months ago at that point. It had just been too long since I'd left her. And I had no intention of getting back together with her. I also had no reason to either. My love life was proceeding perfectly fine without her. I just told her that it was over and put down the phone. I got another call 3 days later. This time, she said she wanted to meet me in person. She probably thought if we talked face to face, she'd be able to persuade me into dating her again. Smart move. Indeed, I was a very indecisive person. I was never able to make decisions when I was younger. That's probably why I wasn't able to make myself a life plan and get a proper job. That's why she'd asked me to meet her. But I wasn't falling for that. I hung up on her. I wanted to make it clear that it was completely over between us. However, the phone rang again 2 days later. They say third time lucky, but the effect it had on me was to simply piss me off. I'd made it pretty clear that this was going nowhere for her. I didn't even bother answering this time. I let the call go straight to voice message. But then she just kept on ringing, again and again and again. On the 20th call, I resorted to switching my phone off. The next day, I had a part-time job in the morning, and I had to get up early. It wasn't often that I had to get up in the early morning. The alarm clock went off, and I woke up groaning. I showered, ate some cereal, and was about to head off when... Jesus Christ. Switching on my phone, I found 50 new voicemail messages and over 100 texts. Practically all of them were from my ex. At this point, I even doubted that she actually cared for me at all. It seemed more likely that she was just trying to mess with my mind. Pissed off, I decided to call her back and give her a good talking to. She answered almost immediately. I prepared myself, taking a deep breath, to scream into the phone. But before I had the chance... "Why don't you answer?" I covered up my ears in pain. The bitch shouted at the top of her high-pitched voice. Fucking hell. She sounded absolutely insane. She actually sounded like there was something mentally wrong with her. I felt like I was speaking to a complete nutter. It actually scared me. I know it sounds lame, but just listening to her voice kicked the fight out of me. Terrified, I just remember thinking, Christ alive, I've got to calm her down. Thinking on my feet, I came up with a lie to calm her down. The standard excuse. I'd been at work the whole day yesterday and had forgotten my phone at home. I was shattered when I got back and didn't bother to look. I'd only just noticed her calls and messages this morning when I switched my phone on. I said this bullshit in the nicest voice I could muster. I got no answer from her. All I could hear from down the line was a sort of whimpering sound. She seemed to still be crying, but her whimpering continued to get louder, and eventually I realized she was laughing. Hysterically, uncontrollably, intensely, she laughed. And then she suddenly stopped. There's a blue vending machine near your house, isn't there, darling? What? What was she on about all of a sudden? Indeed, there was a vending machine very close to my house. So what? I went to my window to look outside. I dropped my phone. There was the vending machine. There was nothing wrong with it itself, but next to it was her. Her face was contorted in fury, but she was also crying. It also looked like she was laughing as well. She'd become a mixture of emotions that shouldn't be humanly possible to portray. In all the years I'd been with her, I'd never seen her make such a face. If an expression of pure insanity existed, that was it. I thought about calling the police, but there was no point. She hadn't actually done anything apart from stare at my house. Until she did something illegal, the police wouldn't move. People got arrested for stalking other people occasionally, but I never heard of women being arrested for stalking. Besides, even if she was arrested, there was no proof of wrongdoing. She'd be released straight away and return. Crazier than ever. Calling the police would just make things worse at this stage. I drew the curtains and called my boss to say that I was ill. I didn't dare leave my room that day. I woke up the next morning to find myself in a pitch-black room. Just in case, I'd gone to bed with all the windows and curtains closed. She'd better have gone. Fearfully, I inconspicuously peered through the curtains at the vending machine. There was no one there. Thank God. The nightmare was over. It would be a pain in the ass, but I would find myself a new place to live, and that would be the end of it. I wouldn't have to go through this ever again. I pulled open the curtains fully to look at the world outside. As the sunshine filled my room and reflected off my face, I vowed to change my ways. This was the day I turned my life around. No more screwing around. I would find a proper job, and the next girl I dated, I would aim to marry for real. It didn't take long for me to be brought back to reality. As I looked outside of the window, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. To my left, there was an old bus shelter I used to get to work. In the bus shelter was a face I recognized. She smiled to me kindly and waved. I could see her mouth the words, "Good morning." I drew the curtains shut almost as fast as I'd opened them. I fell to my knees with my back to the window. I shuddered. This was bad. What could I do? She was still out there, waiting for me. I peered out the window again carefully, to avoid being spotted. She was still there, her line of sight transfixed on my room. There was no way I could get out of here without being caught by her. Luckily, I had just gone to a large shop and I had enough food to last me a week if I rationed. She couldn't stay and wait for me forever. At some point, she'd have to move for food or water. As soon as she moved away, it would be my chance. I'd make a break for it and stay around my friends until things blew over. But she wouldn't move. I'd check every now and again, but she would always be there, staring at me from inside the bus shelter. I checked once during the night as well, but there she was, waiting for me. Did she not need to sleep? It was getting to around the 4th day since we'd started this game of hide-and-seek. The stock of food was starting to run out, and I also felt sick from the pressure of not knowing when she was going to try and force an entrance. I wasn't able to get any proper sleep. Weakly, I opened the curtains by a crack to check her position. She wasn't in the bus shelter anymore. Looking around, it took me a while to realize she was no longer outside. Terrified, my initial thought was that she'd lost her cool and was charging in. I picked up a kitchen knife and waited at the front of the door for the imminent attack. But as I stood there, waiting, I soon realized that she wasn't coming. There was no commotion coming from downstairs, no sound of anyone trying to break and enter. I waited for another 15 minutes just in case, and then, still not hearing anything, I collapsed onto the floor with a cry of relief. She must have had enough. Somehow, I'd managed to beat her at her own game. I'd been tensed up for the last 4 days, and as the tension was released, I felt a wave of dreariness wash over me. I dived into my bed and fell asleep, almost immediately. As for how long I slept, I'm not sure. It was the deepest slumber I'd ever experienced in my entire life. No dreams. It was like I was temporarily dead for a day. When I woke up, I couldn't see anything again. Pure darkness. I must have slept through the whole day and into the night. I instinctively grabbed at the light and switched it on. Sharp light flooded the room and blinded me. I couldn't see anything. Groaning, I stumbled towards the bathroom. My eyes were still half closed, and I wasn't able to see anything properly due to eye dirt clogging up my eyes. I splashed water onto my face, grabbed the towel, and cleaned my face. As I washed myself, I couldn't help feeling relieved. I wouldn't have managed to go on like that for more than another day. If she'd persisted, sooner or later I would have had to take the risk of confronting her. I finished scrubbing at my face and was about to grab my toothbrush when I noticed the towel I was washing my face with was covered in red. Surprised, I looked into the mirror to see what had happened. Maybe I had a nosebleed? But I wasn't bleeding. What I found was much worse. Although smudged, there was obviously red lipstick all over my face. Kiss marks. The entirety of my face was covered in kisses. My ex must have broken in whilst I slept. The realization of what had happened put me in a state of shock. I clumsily collapsed, falling out of the bathroom and onto the carpet of the living room. Shit. I'd let my guard down. Maybe this had been her plan from the start. She'd broken into my house safely after whittling down my mental and physical strength. Shaking, I tried to get up, but I just couldn't. She'd completely outplayed me. I'd been at her mercy for the whole day. I found another terrible surprise waiting for me. although I hadn't noticed it before due to being blinded by the light. And there was actually a parcel lying next to my bed. It was covered in Christmas wrapping paper and kiss marks, just like those I found all over my face. And inside was a video camera. It was full, absolutely full of pictures and videos of my ex playing with me as I slept. Pictures of her kissing me, videos of her playing with herself right in front of my closed eyes. I still can't forget the horrifying imagery. On the other hand, it was this video camera which saved me. The camera was full of evidence which could be used against my ex. Next time she tried to play such a trick, I would simply call the police on her. Thankfully, I haven't needed to resort to that yet, as she hasn't tried anything on me after that. Maybe she was just trying to prove a point to me. If she wanted to, she could get to me. And then I'm at her mercy for the rest of my life. One of the truths. Hidden away in the rich part of town lies my cafe. The luscious interior of the cafe, along with the relaxing jazz music playing in the background, made this place a popular joint for students and married women who had free time during the day. And there was even a terrace, which was filled with people reading books, chatting, and drinking champagne. It was November, and the trio had arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. They'd been allowed to leave school early due to finishing their midterm exams that day. Well, this is shit. Jesus, I'm going to have to repeat a year. You can't have done that badly. I've never heard of a student repeating a year at 14. A fresh batch of squabbling ignited, fueled by the stress of exams and the annoying air of confidence one of the children was giving off. She was obviously the smarter of the bunch. The nattering subsided after 10 minutes, and eventually the girls settled on a new topic of conversation, regarding what schools they planned to progress to. Note, in the Japanese schooling system, high schools/secondary schools are commonly split between chugaku, lower secondary, and koku, upper secondary. What koku you attend can greatly affect your chances on getting into a good university. You always get such good grades. You don't have anything to worry about, do you? There's a pause. Well, being smarter isn't always good, you know. Not always. Don't be a bitch. Giggling begins. What do you mean by not always? Another pause. Well, seems to me that at this rate I'll have to go to the best school in town. But you know... Ah, I get it, the third girl interrupted. She chuckled. You're worried about that rumor, aren't you? What rumor? You know, that the school is haunted, she hissed. The rumor was a famous one. It was more surprising that the other girl had not heard of the story before. Apparently, after a student had committed suicide at the school, students had started to die horrible deaths on the school premises. Those who'd witnessed the bloody demise had sworn that they'd seen the dead student at the scene of the crime. A load of shit. It wasn't uncommon that people claimed places where suicides occurred were haunted. In fact, in Japan, you can find apartments at a comparatively cheaper price if a misfortune had occurred there. Losing interest, I was about to turn away and tend to my duties when I heard a shout. Enough! Turning towards its source, I realized it was one of the ladies sitting on the opposite end of the cafe. The woman left her book on her table and walked over to the three children. her frilly red dress nearly knocking over people's teas and coffees as she walked past their tables. She pushed her way through, and noticing there was no fourth chair provided at the table, proceeded to push a random student off his chair, acquiring it for herself. Sitting down with a Grant, she scratched at her long dark hair rigorously and eyed the children maliciously. Surprised, I stopped what I was doing and stared at the woman. This was the same for the girls. For that brief interval, everything in the cafe seemed to revolve around this little strange woman. She then opened her mouth to speak. Although it may not be any fault of you three, I'm sick and tired of the lies implying that my old school is haunted. Sighing, she waved me over to request a coffee, and taking a sip, she continued. If you three would oblige to stop spreading such idiotic rumors, I would be more than happy to tell you the story of what actually happened at my school. I have an older twin sister. What is the stereotype people have for twins? I sometimes get asked things like, do you feel pain when your twin sister gets hurt? Or, do your parents get confused between the two of you? But not us two. We didn't hate each other, but we didn't care for each other either. We wouldn't argue, talk, or interfere with each other's affairs. We might as well have been thin air to each other. My sister was much abler than me. It wasn't like she was miles ahead. She was always only slightly better than me, whether it was in sports or class. But even when the difference was so small, since a young age I was constantly deemed as the less able, or even the simpleton. During childhood, my stupid parents would always say, "Why can't you even do this? Your sister can already ride her bike." I learned it 20 minutes after her. But this difference might as well have been the difference between heaven and earth. If I scored 95% on a math test, I never got a pat on the back from the teacher and a reassuring "well done." I'd be sitting by myself with my paper, staring at my sister being championed by the class for getting 98. But then, I didn't feel envious of my sister, and she didn't crow about being better. Like I said, she was the equivalent of air for me, and it was the same for her too. As implied by my past maths grades in school, we were both top of the league. There were times when our exam results were the first and second in the school, so it was only natural that we ended up heading to the same high school, the best high school in the country. Our relationship didn't change during high school either. I actually enjoyed high school. Well, only for the first term. Even in a school full of students who have top grades, there are bullies and rebels. And the problem was, these bullies were smart. Whenever they did their evil deeds, they would make sure it wouldn't be found out by their peers. Even when they were found out, they were generally let off due to their excellent grades. Because obviously, grade A students can't be evil. It started when I came back from holiday. The bullying, that is. For some reason, they'd started paying attention to me at school. I don't know why. I don't know what I'd done, but there was nothing that I could do. And that's how my bullying started. During lunch or after school, they'd come to my class to pick me up. Then, they would take me to a conspicuous location and punch me, kick me, hit me. Again, I told you they were clever. They made sure to avoid bruising my face and arms, which would show in school. There were 5 bullies. One was a blonde girl who just sat watching as the 3 girls pummeled me senseless. She just pointed and laughed while giving the girls orders. There was also one more girl who watched the show. My sister. It didn't make sense. My sister hated these types of girls just as much as I did. After ignoring each other for so long, why would she try and break me now? I'd only known the friends I'd made in the first term for 3 months, and as soon as they found out I was being attacked by the rogues of the school, they almost immediately stopped hanging out with me. In the end, I found no one in school wanted to talk to me. I had nobody to help me. The violence continued for months and months. They started to get more creative in the way they hurt and humiliated me. The worst days were when the blonde leader was in a bad mood. Sometimes I was stripped naked and thrown into a pond. When I fell to my knees out of breath, she would grab me by the hair and pull me up to my feet. Not yet. And the violence would continue. All the while, my sister would be staring at me coldly, without a flicker of emotion on her face. It was as if she was staring at a rat or a cockroach. I couldn't tell what she was thinking. I thought about telling my parents, but they already had plenty to worry about with their work. I also didn't want to trouble them on the relationship between us sisters anymore. My sister must have started the bullying in the first place because she realized I wouldn't talk. There was nothing that I could do about the situation. If I told my teachers, there was a chance the bullying would just get worse. It was possible that the teacher would think I was lying, particularly considering that the bullies were ideal students in the classroom. There was absolutely nothing that I could do. Every day when I got back home, I desperately tried to clean the bloodstains on my shirt before my parents came back home. I sobbed as I furiously rubbed my shirt. What had I done to deserve this? As I watched, I heard my sister climb up the stairs. She must have got back from her part-time job. I pictured her face, as cold as ice, staring at me without emotion as the bullies beat me over and over again. Why? And how could it be that she was enjoying her life at school so much when I was in this state? She was part of the tennis club, she had a part-time job and lots of friends. Why did my life have to be so terrible? We were twins. I actually hated my sister more than my bullies, just because she was enjoying life so much. I was tired. The violence just kept on intensifying. Once, I nearly died by drowning because I was just too tired and injured to swim. I can only think of one way. There was only one way to end this. I began the preparations. I wrote a will with just 4 words. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. Slowly, step by step, I walked up the stairs of the school. It wasn't allowed for anyone to be at the school after 9 p.m., so there were no teachers nor students around. But as a student who knew the school well, it wasn't difficult to break inside. I finally got to the top of the stairs. There was a metal door leading to the rooftop. I swung it wide open. The cool breeze of the night hit me straight away and chilled me to the bone. It was a full moon, and I could clearly see the whole of the rooftop and further. My sister was there already, waiting with her back to the door. She was leaning on the rails of the roof, staring down at the school's grounds below. I hadn't expected her to come. I walked towards her. I wanted to talk to you in private. I thought the school would be the best place. Surprisingly, my sister replied straight away. I guess. The closest thing we'd had to a conversation for as long as I could remember. I got closer to my sister as she continued. So, what did you want to talk about? Without hesitation, I threw myself at her. She had her back to me, and I caught her completely off guard. My sister flew into midair and fell downwards. Down and out of sight. Even our parents mistook us between each other. To add to this, my sister hardly ever talked or laughed. She was almost always emotionless. After seeing the will I'd written, they immediately assumed that I was the one who had died. Well, I suppose I had been the one to write it. It had my handwriting, so why would they assume otherwise? From today, I had a new name, a new personality, a new identity. I would go on living my life, but as my sister. Although I hated the bullies, I would now have friends, or at least people I could talk to. I could also get a new part-time job, and I would be able to concentrate on my studies. I could finally go back to being a normal high school student. From the time of my sister's death and her funeral, it had already been a few weeks. Feeling nervous, as planned, I stepped into my sister's classroom, making sure to keep an expressionless face, just like my sister. All of my classmates ignored me, except for one girl, the leader bully. The girl who'd watched, laughing, as I was tortured for all those months. She smiled and winked at me. "Are you all right?" she asked. Although my heart was now beating at the speed of sound, I made sure not to show it. I remained expressionless. "Yeah, it's not like I care about her." The bully nodded and smiled again. "That's great. So you can start working at your job again, can't you?" That was strange. I didn't understand. Why was she talking about my part-time job all of a sudden? I couldn't hide my surprise, and she laughed when she saw my confusion. "What? Did you think we'd take pity on you and cancel the contract?" "Of course not. Don't you remember? We were bullying you at the start. Had nothing to do with your sister. We only stopped bullying you because you said you would pay us off." "I still remember your face when we said we'd bully your sister instead." She patted me on the shoulder. "Good look from today. We've already found someone new to bully." At that moment, I understood everything. Why the girls had started to bully me when I hadn't even met them before. Why my sister was always with them. And why my sister had been leaning against the rooftop rails with her back to me, as if she was asking me to push her. Maybe she'd been in greater pain than me all along. I blanked out then. The next thing I remember, I'm being hauled into a police car by 2 armed policemen. I was absolutely covered in blood. It's amazing the damage you can do with just one pen. I interrupted the story as I brought over another cup of coffee for the woman. It turned out the woman in the red dress had been a friend of the younger twin at the school. At least, before she had started to get bullied. To avoid unnecessary trouble, she'd stopped hanging with the twin, but after finding out what had happened, she'd felt extremely guilty. She'd paid a visit to the girl to apologize, who'd since been placed in the psych ward after being deemed to be mentally unstable. She'd heard the story from her own mouth. The girls seemed horrified by the story. "I don't want to go to a school like that," one cried. That seemed to anger the woman. Bullying happens in a lot of schools, and ever since that incident, all the bullies were punished severely. There isn't a single bully there now, and it's stupid to say the school's haunted. But then another girl pointed out with a pale face that the incident was a good enough reason as any for the school to become haunted. I agreed. This was one of the most gruesome tales I'd ever heard in my entire life. But to that, the woman simply snapped. If you ask me, what the girl did was perfectly natural given what happened. Wouldn't you have done the same in her shoes? Lynching. I'm a salesman working in the south of Japan. I'd prefer not to reveal any of my private information. This is something that happened when I was 16 years old. At the time, I'd just left high school. Like so many other youths in my position, rather than finding a proper full-time job, I spent time, fucking around, drinking and getting high, going on nights out and hitting on girls. Eventually, I ended up hanging around a lot with a guy I knew who had graduated from my same high school 3 years before me. Let's call this guy A. It seems weird me saying this when I hung out with this guy for so long, but this guy wasn't a nice person. He was pretty short, maybe around 150 centimeters tall, had a punch perm hairstyle. It's a popular hairstyle for thugs and Japanese yakuza, and spent most of his time getting fucked up on solvent and getting blind drunk. Using A's contacts, we managed to get a part-time job working for a small group of yakuza in the city. The job mostly involved boring shit like cleaning and washing, but the pay was pretty good. The yakuza probably have a hard time finding cleaners willing to work for them. The gangsters were really nice to me, probably because I was still a kid, but my friend wasn't so lucky. Basically, the guy was incredibly stupid. He kept on spouting obvious lies about how hard he was, and he wasn't a particularly hard worker either. He was constantly being shouted at by the yakuza members. One day, A, high on drugs, or maybe it was solvent abuse, I'm not sure, tried to rape a prostitute working at the local soap land. This wouldn't have been a problem from the yakuza's point of view, but the girl happened to be the squeeze of one of the gang members. Let's call him X. After hearing this from the girl, X called A to the office of the gang. It happened to be my shift at the time, and I saw the whole thing. A started to jabble excuses like a broken record, but X wasn't listening. Without warning, X picked up a golf club and proceeded to bash A around the face. I was scared shitless. I thought I was going to piss myself. He continued to beat A to the ground, and an onslaught of violence continued for a few hours. At the end, I could see some bone from his skull, and his legs were obviously broken. A seemed to be on the verge of death. X eventually stopped and called over me and one of the yakuza members who also happened to be there at the time. We helped him pick up A and drag him to a van. Although I protested, I was then forced to drive the van to a warehouse located deep in the mountain range. Once we were there, X dragged A off the van and into the warehouse. Me and the other yakuza member followed him in. I was terrified. I didn't care much about A. I just wanted to leave as soon as possible. But as soon as I was there, X handed me a rope with a noose attached. He looked me in the eyes and said, eerily calmly, "You're going to kill him." Thinking back now, I think I understand why. It was my bad luck to be there in the first place. If I was the one to kill A, there would be no way I would talk to the police about the incident. I cried and pleaded with the guy. I'd always thought of myself as being hard. I'd also thought about becoming Yakuza in the future, but I realized at that moment that I wasn't cut out for this. I couldn't kill the guy. My desperate attempts to avoid the gruesome task seemed to annoy X. He grabbed me by the hair and started to repeatedly punch me in the face over and over again. I wasn't sure how long the beating went on for. Maybe it was 10 minutes, maybe a few hours. At the end of it, there was no pain. I just felt a dull ache and heard a squelching sound every time he raised his fist. Then, suddenly, the punching stopped and I fell to the ground. A, who had been knocked out, had got up. He slowly turned his head and looked at us. And then he started to laugh hysterically. X let go of me and picked up a baseball bat he brought with him. He then proceeded to smash A around the side of the face. A fell to the ground but kept on laughing. The other Yakuza who was with us also picked up a bat, and the two Yakuza went to work on A. They continued to bash A in from all angles, but for better or worse, A seemed to cling to life, like a newborn child clings to her mother. X sighed and said to the other Yakuza, "Bring over the rope." The Yakuza strolled over and picked up the rope lying next to me. "What should we do with the kid?" X looked at me. That's all I remember. Next thing I knew, I woke up outside my office. The next day, A's face was on the front page of the local newspaper. The headline read, "Drugged up youngster falls off bridge." I don't know why I'm telling this story now. I don't feel guilty about A's death. After all, it wasn't my fault. I guess I just maybe wanted someone to listen to me for once. The world of the Yakuza. During high school, I used to be part of a group of thugs. We were half just friends and half partners in crime. We didn't do anything severe. We just worked together and shoplift every now and again and vandalized shops and buildings with graffiti. One of the members of our group was called Kenji, and he used to be a Yakuza, but he wasn't particularly scary or anything, and he was kind to us. He'd tell us stories about the world of the Yakuza. The story I'm about to tell you now is one of the stories he told me. When he had just joined the Yakuza and was still a newbie, his work involved just helping out his Yakuza colleagues. He was made to buy drinks and cigarettes, and basically he was just an errand boy. Kenji hadn't wanted to join the Yakuza in the first place. He was made to join forcefully, and was thinking about quitting if he wasn't able to do anything interesting. But one day, one of the Yakuza came up to Kenji. "Hey Kenji, could you help me out?" It was probably just some boring job again, but as usual, Kenji didn't have the option to say no. So without asking about what the job was, he just nodded his head and accepted the job. "Okay, here we go then," and the Yakuza member passed Kenji a car key. "What the fuck is this?" Kenji asked. The guy just snickered. "It's your first job." Kenji was then given a map and was told to drive the car down to a scrapyard located 20 kilometers out of town. According to him, all Kenji needed was to give his name and the car would be disposed by the workers there. Without understanding why, Kenji drove the car down to the scrapyard as he was told. When he finally got there, he found a few men were lying in wait for him. One of them came up to them. "Is this car?" As soon as Kenji confirmed, "Get out and give me the key." Kenji didn't really understand what was happening, so he just listened to the men and obediently did what they asked. According to Kenji, in the Yakuza world, it's best just to do what you're asked and ask questions later. The man got into the car and drove the car into a space between two massive iron plates. As he got out of the car, he called out, "Okay, do it," to another man who'd moved to a control room without Kenji noticing. The two iron plates began to suddenly move, and slowly crushed the car into a flat plate of metal. Kenji stopped talking to light a cigarette. "Kenji, that just sounds like you were made to help out in disposing an old car," said Kenji's younger brother, who was also listening in. I thought that too. From what he'd told us, it wasn't really anything worth talking about. Nothing significant or out of the ordinary, really. Then Kenji laughed. I wasn't finished. You see, when the two iron plates began to crush the car, I heard a scream from inside. And when the two plates were really close to each other, there was a splattering sound. That wasn't the sound of metal being crushed. Myself and Kenji's brother fell silent. I felt a bit sick. Kenji continued. In the end, I didn't ask the guys there about it, and I didn't confront the Yakuza who'd given me the errand either. But, I had a hunch. That's why I didn't check the trunk of the car. Kenji started to laugh again. I felt really sick. Buried. This is a story I heard from a thug I was friendly with way back. Apparently, he used to hang around with a young Japanese Yakuza member. Basically, they spent their time going around town finding women to hit on and take back home. The only problem was, they were very forceful and used hard drugs and aphrodisiacs to make the women more obedient. So one day, as usual, the two were planning on going on an expedition, but due to sickness, he decided to stay behind, and the young Yakuza went on without him. Apparently, he was successful in catching quite the looker. Once he managed to persuade her to go back to the hotel with him, he pinned the poor woman down and injected her with drugs, just like usual. The only problem was, the woman died as a result of the drugs. There's no particularly clear reason why she died. Maybe she died from an overdose. Maybe she just had a bad reaction with one of the drugs. It didn't matter. Terrified of a police investigation, the young Yakuza went crying to his boss and asked him what to do. This wasn't a common occurrence, but not an unusual event in the Yakuza world. So, the boss told him if he brought the body over to the office, he'd take care of it from there. Relieved, the young Yakuza explained the situation and forced my ill friend over. They both somehow dragged the body out of the room without being seen, threw it into the car, and drove down to the Yakuza office building with full speed. But this is when the trouble started. When they showed the body to the Yakuza boss, his face froze over. There was no way for them to know, but the woman in the bag was actually a relative of a general in another Yakuza group. If this body was found, the residual of drugs left inside would lead straight back to their Yakuza group. There could even be an outright war. So, although it was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning at that point, the Yakuza boss called a few other Yakuza members. Along with him and his friend, they drove down with the body deep into the mountains to dispose of it. What preceded was hours and hours of digging. They had to make sure the hole was so deep that there was no way the body could ever be found. Once they'd finished digging it, it was around 5 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was starting to rise. Shattered, he and his friend dumped the body into the hole and were just about to start covering it up, when suddenly, the Yakuza members surrounded his friend and tied his legs and arms up with duct tape so he couldn't move. Tired from all the digging, he wasn't able to fight back at all. You see, there were 2 reasons for driving down to the mountains. One was to dispose of the body, and the other was to get rid of the culprit of the murder. His friend hopelessly thrashed around to no avail. The Yakuza members picked him up and dropped him into the hole next to the body. They proceeded to fill up the hole and buried the friend alive. Trauma. I was a university student. Me and my friend from university were drinking at the counter seat of an izakaya bar. On the far side of the counter, there was a beautiful woman. I mean gorgeous. I think she was in her early 30s, and she was drinking by herself. The atmosphere of the izakaya didn't suit her. In her elegant black dress and high heels, she was the kind of woman you'd expect to see in a hotel lounge bar with a rich businessman or something. Although we thought of talking to her or buying her a drink, we were just sitting around talking to ourselves without being able to do a thing. A while later, a man entered the izakaya. He looked around 40 years old and had a big build. He was dressed in a black suit and appeared to be a businessman of some kind. Without a word, he silently approached the woman sitting by herself. Thank God I didn't try and hit on her, I thought to myself. She must have been waiting for him. I leaned over to my friend to whisper the same thing when... smack! The guy punched the face of the woman. It wasn't a slap around the face or anything. It was a full-blown punch. Without even having time to scream, the woman fell to the floor. The guy then jumped on top of her and proceeded to pummel her from all angles. The whole izakaya froze over. Everybody, including us two, just stared dumbfounded. It happened so suddenly. Nobody could do anything just from the sheer surprise and fear. The izakaya was completely silent, and all you could hear was the thud, thud, thud as the man delivered blow after blow. The woman seemed to be half unconscious, and all she did was moan every now and again. I wasn't sure how long it lasted, but when the guy finally stopped, the floor and his shirt were covered in blood. The woman's face was no longer even in the same shape as it was before. If you hit her that much, she's gonna die. But I couldn't do anything. I would have helped if I could have, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. The guy knelt down and picked up the woman by the scruff of her neck. As he did so, something fell to the floor with a dull thump. It was a revolver. He picked it up and dragged the woman out of the izakaya without a word. The two-faced truth. We humans are born into captivity. We're born and live in shackles made of common sense and morals, which are ingrained deep within our subconscious from a young age. How ironic is it that our parents or guardians, the ones that are meant to love us the most, are the ones that confine our minds and imagination and keep us from what we all want the most: freedom. This happened such a long time ago that I can't remember the age I was at the time. This was around 40 years ago, and I was probably around 13 or 14. I lived deep within the countryside of Japan with my parents and younger sister. We were pretty well off compared to the other families, but that's not really saying much since the area we lived in was really poor. Most of the money moved to the cities, and as soon as the young teens were old enough to live by themselves, they would move away from the desolation which was the countryside. The school I went to was this rundown place, roughly 10 minutes away from where I lived. It couldn't even be called a school by Japan's current standards. I wasn't the most studious of students, and at 11 in the morning, rather than being in the classroom, me and my friends were smoking around the back of the school. Yo, dude. I turned around to look at my friend. Who do you fancy at the moment? Said Katori. Flustered, by mistake I drew in an excessive amount of smoke. Sputtering, I slapped my friend around the head. Holding his head, Katori turned to face my other friend, Koji. Well, you might still be a hairless kid, but I'm an adult now. I don't know about you guys, but I'd say it's about time we lost our virginity." "Shut up, Katori, you moron," sighed Koji. Koji was a quiet kid and wasn't very popular in school. He also refused to smoke, having choked badly the first time he tried. But at the same time, Koji had earned my and Katori's respect for one big reason. He was a hell of a fighter. When we were still in primary school, we'd witnessed Koji's brute strength. He'd been surrounded by several high schoolers when we were walking back from school. There wasn't a particular reason why they picked on us. We'd just been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Katori and I immediately gave in and handed over the money and trinkets we had in our bags. But Koji refused, stubbornly. We tried to stop him, but before we could do anything, fists were flying. I think the high schoolers had expected dealing with Koji would be a breeze. A few smacks around the head, and he'll give in and hand over his bag. Well, that's what they thought. Koji just wouldn't let go of his bag. Koji must have realized that he had no chance at beating all the kids just by himself. So rather than dealing with them all, he went straight for the boy who seemed to be the leader of the group. He stabbed at his eyes, kicked his balls, kneed him in the face, all the while his blows rained down upon him from all angles. Even whilst bleeding from the head, he refused to let go of the kid. Worried, the high schoolers tried prying him off, but to no avail. Eventually, hearing the pleas of their wounded friend, they were forced to retreat. "Jesus Christ, Koji," I remember Katori saying after the fight. "You should have just handed over your bag. Did you have something important in there or something?" As Koji lay flat on the road, we opened his bag to check inside. I remember looking inside to find the bag was empty. Katori smirked at Koji. "Don't pretend like you don't have someone you fancy. I've seen you eyeing that girl next to you in the classroom." That caught my attention. This was interesting. It wasn't like Koji to show interest in other people. As far as I knew, we were the only two people he talked to. And he was so quiet, I sometimes doubted that he even talked to his own family. He certainly didn't when I was around, anyway. So, from that day, I decided to observe Koji. It had me interested at the time. I couldn't believe a kid like Koji, a kid who seemed to have no interest in anybody but himself, would have such an interest in a particular person. Koji was inconspicuous in his activities, but my seat position at the back of the classroom gave me practically a bird's eye view of the whole class. If I concentrated, I could decipher most of the secret goings-on of the whole class. So, despite Koji's best efforts, it didn't take me long to find out who Koji was looking at. It was Ayane. That had surprised me a lot. Ayane was the poor kid in school, and being the poorest in my old school, that was saying something. Her clothes were always dirty, and she smelled constantly of rotting fish. It wasn't surprising that she had no friends in our school. The whole class had formed a sort of U-shape around the girl, since the class members naturally tried to position themselves as far away from the source of the odor as they could. So you can imagine my surprise when I realized Koji was interested in the girl. Thinking from a normal, self-respecting teenage boy's perspective, this seemed impossible. But at the same time, this was Koji, the mystery kid. With him, anything was possible. For the next few weeks, this finding became my obsession. I had found myself a juicy story which only I knew about. The bitch within me surfaced as a bubble surfaces in a bath. Koji was a very clever kid, though. I tried to find evidence of Koji's interest for Ayane, but he gave nothing away. He never approached her directly. There were no letters, no physical illustrations of affection. If only there was something. At that moment, me and Katori's suspicion was based only on Koji looking at Ayane. That didn't mean anything to anyone else. Only to me and Katori, who knew what kind of person Koji was. I had to get my hands on something more obvious than that. Then I could announce Koji's love affair to the whole class. I snickered just thinking about it. It wasn't often that Koji's face dropped. Me and Katori always headed back in the same direction home. In fact, our houses were only a few meters away from each other. My parents told me they'd been friends with the Katori family before I was even born. Koji lived in the opposite direction to us, so usually me and Katori would wave our goodbyes in school and head in the opposite direction back home. But today was different. After leaving school, I apologized to Katori, saying that I'd left something behind at school. I then U-turned and ran straight after Koji. My plan was to find evidence of Koji's interest in Ayane. Who knows, if I was lucky I might be able to find them holding hands or kissing. I'd visited Koji several times and I knew his route back home, so it didn't take long for me to find him. And there were plenty of other students returning home in the same direction, so it wasn't difficult to stalk him without being found out. The only problem was, the number of people provided the perfect cover, but it also made it difficult to keep an eye on him. I'm not the tallest of people, to say the least. And suddenly, without realizing, Koji vanished from in front of me. Surprised, I ran forward, pushing past the other kids. Had he noticed me? I soon realized Koji was no longer en route back home. So, the next day I tried following Koji again. This time I tried to keep an even closer eye on him. As we were reaching the place where I lost sight of him last time, he makes a left turn. Koji was not heading back home. I inconspicuously follow Koji around the left turn to see him walking down the road. It hadn't been a mistake. It also didn't seem like he was going down the side street to take a piss. But why was Koji heading down this path? As far as I knew, this path led to nowhere. Down this path was the run-down old part of town where no one lived anymore. It was more woodland than anything else. But anyway, I diligently follow Koji along the road, this time from way far back. There was no cover of people along this road. In fact, I think we were the only two walking down there. After walking down the road for 5 minutes, Koji took another left into a large open stretch of land. Here, I realized why Koji was coming down this path. In the far distance, roughly 100 meters in the distance, I noticed another school kid walking in front of me and Koji. We were the only 3 people there. I tried to work out who this student was, but he or she was just too far ahead. The clothes were unisex, but the height implied the student was perhaps a woman. I could also tell she had unkempt hair. And that was when I realized. Ayane? Was Koji stalking Ayane back to her house? Excited, I continued following Koji and Ayane. Eventually, we end up at this open space just below the woods. I'm wondering why they'd come down to a desolated place like this when Ayane walks closer towards the woods. As I get closer too, I realize she must live there. Ayane's home wasn't a house, it was more of a shed. I couldn't believe someone would live in such a place, but as I watch, Ayane knocks on the door, and the door swings inwards to reveal a woman. Ayane's mother. I'm watching this all unfold when suddenly the woman angles her head up to look straight in my direction. Shit. Terrified, I ducked down instinctively, but I soon realized that she wasn't looking at me, but at Koji. However, Koji remains expressionless and continues to stare at Ayane and her mother. I couldn't make out any of their expressions. If there were words, I couldn't make those out either. A few seconds go by, and the door closes. Again, I couldn't work out what Koji was doing as I was keeping a safe distance away from him. He seemed just to stare at Ayane's house for a few moments before turning around and head back down the path he came. I didn't completely understand what was going on, but it was clear now that Koji had affectionate feelings towards Ayane. Smirking, I quickly nip around the corner before Koji has a chance to find me and run back home. I remember cheering quietly underneath my breath so Koji couldn't hear me. This was great. I'd finally found the evidence I needed to confront Koji. But I never had a chance to embarrass Koji. The afternoon I spent spying on Koji was a Friday, so it was the following week when I planned to announce Koji's infatuation with Ayane to the entire class. However, it was during that weekend that me and Katori next heard about Koji and Ayane. From the police. Me and Katori and our parents were contacted suddenly by the school on Sunday, saying that the police needed to have a word with me and Katori. The police came to my house to talk to us. Katori and a couple teachers came as well. They informed us that Ayane's mother had been found badly injured in her house last night, and that Koji and Ayane had disappeared completely. And that most likely, the stalker had killed Koji and abducted Ayane. Ayane's mother somehow managed to get in contact with the police before bleeding out. She informed them that a hooded man dressed in black had broken an entry into her house. The man had apparently threatened her with a knife and had tried to abduct Ayane. She told them she did her best to stop the man, but he got away. In the process of trying to save her child, she'd been stabbed in the arm. Upon the school being informed, the police soon found out that Koji had also gone missing that night. And it also turned out Koji had been asking the school office about Ayane. Questions about who she was living with and where she was living and so on. Asking Ayane's mother. They soon found out Koji had been visiting their house regularly recently. Following this information, the police hypothesized that Koji had got mixed up in the problem. Koji must have somehow worked out that there was some kind of stalker hunting after Ayane. Maybe he'd seen someone suspicious watching Ayane as she returned from school. He'd obviously been stalking Ayane for the last week or so to check if she was okay. The fact that Koji had disappeared along with Ayane meant that he could be dead, injured, or have been abducted along with her. I finally understood why Koji had been following Ayane. He'd been following the girl in absolute secrecy to keep an eye on her. Who knows? Maybe he'd been given away because of my clumsy attempts to follow Ayane and Koji. We told them everything we knew about Koji and the goings-on between him and Ayane, which wasn't much. How we'd seen him in class eyeing the girl, how we'd expected they were maybe dating. I also admitted to following Koji in the afternoon last Friday. The police also asked us on where we thought Koji could be. We didn't have any ideas. Maybe the park? The school? We were just as clueless to what happened to Koji and where he could be at this point. I remember crying when I got home that night. What kind of idiot friend was I? I should have realized that something was up that night when I saw Koji following Ayane back home. I should have realized when I saw Koji's stern expression as he looked at Ayane in the classroom. Maybe if I'd just been a little smarter, that would have been something that I could have done. By the way, we're talking about something that happened in the 1960s. Police technology wasn't as advanced in those days. No credit cards, no DNA evidence to track people down. We had to face facts. Koji had completely disappeared. He was most likely dead. There was nothing we could do. And that was the last I heard of Koji and Ayane. It's generic, but I guess maybe one of the saddest things about dying is that people forget about you eventually. I met up with my local friends, including Katori, every now and again, but it was rare for Koji to be mentioned during a conversation. When Koji was mentioned, it was always about the mystery of Koji and Ayane. At the time, the incident had just gone down in the town's history books as an open and shut case tragedy. But for us, Koji's friends, The case had always remained a mystery. Koji had always been a mysterious person, and he never revealed his true self to the teachers or even to his parents. The main question which sprang to me and Katori's mind were how Koji had been abducted or killed. Were we the only ones who knew how powerful and stubborn Koji had been as a kid? He hadn't backed down to a group of 16-year-olds in a fight when he was 13. Even if the stalker had been clever, it should have been extremely difficult to abduct and kill Koji. But despite this, there had been no signs anywhere around town that there'd been a struggle when Koji was abducted. At least when we asked, that's what the police told us. They really didn't provide much information regarding the case, saying it was confidential. No shouts were heard by the townsfolk, no blood on the pavement. It was as if Koji had simply vanished into thin air that day. Another question was why the stalker that night had decided to attack the mother and abduct Ayane from her own house at the same time. But to this, Katori provided a convincing answer. He said after the incident he'd done a lot of research on similar cases using past newspapers held in the town library. Obviously, he tried to find something that could have led back to the stalker. When you look it up, it turns out that such incidents happen too frequently. It wouldn't be far-fetched to assume the man had tried to rape the mother as well. The mother was most likely stabbed by mistake because of the struggle. It was also true that Ayane's house was off the beaten path out of town, and was a perfect location for an abduction during the dead of night. It had annoyed us at the time that the police hadn't given us any more information or considered the case further. Maybe by thinking it through, they might have found the culprit of the crime. The police said this was an open and shut case, and they weren't permitted to talk to us any further about Koji's disappearance. We also tried to discuss it with the school teachers, but they told us the police hadn't told them anything either, and to leave the adults to do their jobs. I realized what the teachers said was true, and we accepted it. What was there that 2 high school kids could do about a murder case? This isn't some kind of manga or TV drama. Even if we miraculously could find anything the police didn't, by delving in deep, we could get ourselves killed. So, 6 years after the incident, I'd graduated from Japanese high school. The university I was attending to was one in Tokyo. I can't give away its name just in case it leads back to my identity, but I was studying economics. Katori, along with most of my friends, had gone straight into the working world after graduating from high school. In fact, Katori had managed to find himself a full-time job working for a major supermarket chain in the city closest to our town. I kind of envied him. I was stuck in a new world which I didn't really like. I had to change the way I look and talk ever since I moved away from home. Tokyo was an entertaining town, but at the same time there was part of me that missed home. While attending university, I was living in this shitty apartment building near campus. Tokyo housing was pricey even in those days, and most students lived in places like that or commuted from their houses. My parents' house was too far to commute from, so naturally I spent my years at uni in the apartment. So, maybe you've been finding this story boring up to now, but what I really wanted to talk to you about was a certain letter. A letter I received in the apartment during my university years. In fact, what I've been talking about up till now is only there to provide context for this letter. The envelope was brown and didn't have a name on the front, nor a stamp. It must have been dropped off by my letterbox by hand. Hi. Honestly, I don't really know what to say or why I decided to write this letter. I found out where you were by asking the locals. It wasn't too difficult to find your apartment either. All I had to do was sit on a bench outside the university entrance in the morning and wait for you to come. Speaking of which, if you're paying for university, you really should attend more often. Although it wasn't difficult, it did take me 3 days to actually see you in uni. I guess there's 2 reasons why I've decided to contact you now. One is that the police have closed the case a while back now. Another is simply that I've always found it painful to lie to you. I think it's about time you knew the truth. I found out after a few years what they were saying about us. About me. That I'd been killed by a stalker all those years ago. But it's not true. That was just a story the school and police agreed to tell to avoid being penalized. I'll be blunt about it. It was me who abducted Ayane. The first time I'd noticed that something was up with Ayane was near the start of our second year in middle school. No one else seemed to notice, but then again I was sitting next to her in class. Did you know she used to get beaten by her mother? Apparently, Ayane's father had left the house a long time ago, and without any other family to rely on, her mother had to bring her up single-handedly. I can't understand it myself, but with no money and no support, her mother began to release her stress on Ayane. When I first noticed at school, there was this great big bruise on her neck. And when I paid closer attention, I realized Ayane would wince every now and again in class. So, anyway, I decided to confront her after school about it, and she just shakes her head and tries to leave. I stop her and forcefully pull her shirt up and find her body covered in bruises and cuts. And the bitch had been beating her almost every single day. My first reaction was to talk to our school or the police, but Ayane begs me not to tell them about it. Against my better judgment, I then try talking to the mother, but Ayane doesn't answer back her mother at all, and when I ask the mother about her bruises, she just says she tripped. I realized at that point the issue wasn't as simple as I first thought. Ayane may be being abused by her mother, but that didn't matter. Ayane loved her mother all the same, and she wouldn't say anything to incriminate her. And besides, if her mom did get arrested, who would look out for her then? So, I decided to take things into my own hands. During the afternoon or after school, I'd go check on Ayane. I'd knock on the door purposefully every day at varying times, just to make a point to her mom that I was always watching. I've been doing this for around 3 months when it happened. It was a Saturday and I'd been forced into school to do extra studies due to my terrible math scores that day. I finished quite late and I was heading to Ayane's house that night around 10 p.m. when I hear a massive cry come from their home. I slam the door open and rush inside to find the mother sitting on a chair, looking at me bewildered. Ayane was on the floor, half naked, and standing above her was a naked man with his dick out. It didn't take me long to work out what was going on. The cash on the table, the man with an erection. Her mother had been selling Ayane's body for money. Seeing me enter, the man grabs his clothes and makes a run for it. Initially, I was just too stunned to do anything. As he pushed past me, I just remember staring at Ayane. The mother then brings out a kitchen knife and orders me to leave her house for good. Ayane is my child. She's my slave. At least I think I remember her saying something like that. But how should I know? After all, next thing I remember, Ayane's sobbing and begging me to stop as I held the knife at her mother's throat. The only choice I had after that was to run from town with Ayane. Not wanting to get caught was one thing, but if I was caught, Ayane would have to return to her mother. I made a split-second decision right then. I decided to look after her. I only found out years later that Ayane's mom had lied to the police. The clever bitch. I guess she must have realized that saying the truth and catching me and Ayane would likely end up incriminating her as well. If I was missing anyway, she likely figured it was just easier to tell a lie about some kind of stalker. After all, if she told the public, she'd have to tell them the reason why I attacked her. She didn't want to face the scrutiny of the public for not helping Ayane. In fact, she would most likely get arrested too. I doubt you remember, but there were also a few similar incidents with stalkers in other towns in Japan at the time. Sad. But I guess it did benefit me too, as I didn't get caught. What happened after that is a long story, but we got by. Japan was still poor in those days, and there were plenty of other working kids like us living by themselves. People were very kind, and we somehow always managed to find help when we needed it. In the end, I ended up getting a job under the Yakuza. I'm one of the senior members of our Kumi, and I work in Tokyo now. If you ever want to visit, come to the XXX building in XXX, Saitama Prefecture. Koji. The student that never existed. When I was a fresher at university, I didn't have many friends, and I often ended up staying in the computer labs by myself, doing research and playing games. I was pretty introverted and didn't talk to that many people, but there was one dude who was always pestering me. He was the kind of dude who was always cheerful and talked to anybody as if they were the closest of friends. Pretty annoying, if you ask me. Then again, he seemed like a nice guy, so I didn't push him away. But at the same time, I didn't say anything more to him than a casual greeting. So imagine my surprise when the dude suddenly asked me, "Would you like to come to a house party? It's going to be great. There's a whole group of people coming from the other unis in the city." As I told you before, I don't enjoy talking to people. Going to a house party is my version of hell. Although this wasn't his actual name, let's just call this guy Sam. Sam wouldn't give up easy. He kept on inviting me over and over again, and eventually, I gave in. I figured I could just turn up and chat for an hour or so, and then just leave at the first available opportunity. The thing is, I needn't have worried about the party. The day of the party, I wasn't able to go anyway due to catching influenza the day before. I messaged Sam. "I'm sorry, mate. I'm ill. Can't go to the party today." My phone started ringing, almost immediately after I'd sent off the message. "No worries. I'll pick you up myself. Everyone's waiting to meet you." I didn't understand how someone could be so pushy. It wasn't as if this was a job, after all. If I didn't want to go, why should I have to? I replied, "I'm sorry, but I have influenza. I don't want everyone there to catch it, so I'll give this party a miss. Maybe next time. I'm actually feeling sick, so I'm calling off." And I switched off my phone. Later that day, the symptoms became worse, and I headed down to the hospital with my car. Maybe because of my dizzy head, I stupidly left my phone behind. It was late in the evening when I finally got back to my apartment. I switched my phone on to find 10 new voicemail messages. Interestingly, they were all from the same number. All from Sam. I sighed and pressed playback on the newest message. "Why the fuck aren't you answering your phone? Where is your address? I'll kill you." I dropped my phone in fright. The voice wasn't that of Sam, but was gruff and deeper. The person sounded like, well, like a Yakuza. I haven't seen Sam in person at university since that party. But an email from the university did go out to all students, including myself. Please be wary of an individual named Sam, who claims to be a first-year media studies student. Investigating our records, there is no such student at our university. The purpose is unknown, but he has been inviting students from our university to house parties. A few students conversing with this individual have gone missing. Eventually, I did see Sam's face, but not in person. On the news. The headline read, students forced to take heavy drugs and join the Yakuza. The article explained how the Yakuza hid members within universities with the intention of tricking students into taking highly addictive drugs by inviting them to parties. Some of the students were threatened at gunpoint that they, along with their families, would be killed if they went to the police. It went on to explain that the aim of the Yakuza was to increase their workforce. The students who became addicted to the drugs eventually went crawling on all fours to the Yakuza, who hired them as slaves, in return, providing them with more narcotics. When you become 18 and head off to university, you have to start looking out for yourself. Although it feels like things are going well at the moment, there's no knowing what traps might be lying around the corner. I'm still an introvert. As a result, I'm often made fun of at uni. But I don't mind. I know that it pays to be shy. The Girl in the Net Cafe. This isn't a ghost story, but it's certainly the scariest thing that's happened to me to date. A few years back, I was still at uni. Nearby where I lived, there was this internet cafe I used to drop by often. Japanese internet cafes always have a wide selection of books and manga available to read freely. They also have many game consoles and PC games available for rent. This one wasn't particularly cheap in comparison to others, but it was clean and the chairs were comfortable. It also had a very wide selection of online games available. One day, I decided to stay at the cafe overnight. I'd spent the whole day reading a series of manga which I still hadn't finished. I just couldn't be bothered to go back home. And besides, it was a Friday and I had no lectures or prior engagements during the weekend. So I spent the night reading until the morning hours. I was starting to doze off when it happened. I'm not sure, but I think it was around 2 o'clock in the morning. In the room right next to me, or perhaps cubicle would be more accurate, someone was muttering to themselves loudly. I could tell by the voice that it was a woman. She seemed to be overly excited. This moaning and muttering continued for 20 minutes, and there was no sign of the store owner stepping in to deal with her. Maybe he was fast asleep. I got really annoyed, and not being able to bear it any longer, I slammed the door to the cubicle with my fist. As soon as I did so, her moans stopped. But as time passed, her annoying blubbering started up again, although much quieter this time. I completely lost it at that stage. What kind of freak was this bitch? And I decided to give her a proper talking to. The walls to the cubicles aren't particularly high in Japanese internet cafes. If you're tall enough, you can peer over without any trouble. I was just about tall enough, so with an angry look on my face, I stood up to my full height. I then peered over the wall separating our cubicles to take a good look at her. I wish I hadn't. I peered over the wall to find the woman staring at me, directly in the face. She was very close to my wall. It can't have been more than half a meter between her face and mine. She was facing my cubicle dressed with nothing but her underwear, a pile of crumpled clothes laying next to her. As I stared at her, she smiled and started to feel herself whilst mumbling again. I thought I was going to cry. There was something definitely the matter with this woman. You'd think the situation was kinky, but it really wasn't. Trust me, when weird sexual shit like this happens to you, you can't help but be scared. She was obviously some kind of demented pervert. Maybe she got sexual satisfaction from sitting next to younger guys. I really didn't know what to do. I ended up just sitting down again without a sound. Her muttering continuing all the while. At that point, It was 3 o'clock in the evening, so I didn't fancy walking back home. Besides, I had paid to stay in the cafe until midday tomorrow. I tried to force myself into sleep, but I just couldn't with the constant mumbling. In the end, I just closed my eyes, put my headphones on, and set my iPod on a large enough volume to drown out her voice. And this was the closest thing to sleep that I was going to get. As I lay on the floor listening to classical music, although I wasn't able to fall asleep completely, I entered a sort of lucid dream state of mind. My mind wandered between the events of my past and my imagination. Imagery flashed before my eyes, which I wasn't fully able to remember when I woke up. It was the kind of thing you get when you're dozing. Not asleep, but not completely awake either. That's when I felt something warm against my nose. In my dazed state, my first reaction was to think this was some part of my lucid dream. But as I opened my eyes, I found the woman's face lying next to mine. I think she must have leaned over the wall and unlocked my cubicle from the inside, then entered from the door to my room. As I lay there, at first, I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Maybe this was still part of my dream. But as she noticed that I had woken up, she smiled at me to reveal a set of yellow teeth. "Good morning, sleepyhead." Before I knew what I was doing, I pushed the woman away from me with my arms flailing around, and I proceeded to kick her in the face by mistake. She fell to the ground screaming whilst clutching her nose. All at once there was utter commotion. As the woman screamed, all the residents of the cubicles next to us began to wake up with angry grunts. The lights also switched on as the part-time worker left in charge of the place came running to see the source of the commotion. In the end, the police were called. The woman and I were taken into custody. I was released the next morning without too much trouble, but the woman was less lucky. It seemed that there really was something wrong with her head. In the handbag she had with her at the cafe, the police found 5 or 6 fruit knives hidden inside. I don't know what she was planning to do with them. Eat some fruit? Stab someone? I wouldn't put it past that crazy woman. But whatever the case, in Japan, however small, weapons are not allowed to be possessed in public. It gives me the shivers to think about what might have happened. I realized I might have been quite lucky. I'll never stay at an internet cafe again.
The Girl Who Loved Herself. This is a true story, something which happened to me a while back. It's not designed to scare people. In fact, you might end up feeling rather depressed than scared after hearing this. I was 22, and I was approaching the 4th year since I'd moved out. I was attending my final year at university. I worked harder at my part-time job than my studies at the time. As with most students, drinking and parties were more important to me than what I did after university. I met my girlfriend through my part-time job. There was a party earlier in the year where all employees were invited, whether they were temporary or part-time workers, it didn't matter. She worked there part-time too, and because our shifts didn't overlap, it was the first time I'd ever met her. We ended up hitting it off at the party, and I found myself at her apartment later that night. Ever since then, we'd been dating. I don't mean to boast, but she was pretty hot. Flaming hot might be more accurate. I wouldn't be surprised if she had been a model. In fact, I think she did get scouted a few times, although she turned all the scouts down. She was very prideful, and I think she believed an unintellectual job like modelling was demeaning for a woman. She preferred to work in an environment which was intellectually challenging. I think she imagined herself to be this beautiful scholar character, not like the other pretty blondes. Stupid, if you ask me. Narcissistic, too. Might as well get the highest paying job available, I reckon. As you can imagine, it's not really fun hanging around with a person like that. At one point, I'd had enough of her judging people. She even did it to me sometimes. She treated me like scum. I thought about splitting up with her, but then I just couldn't. She was genuinely shocked when I said it. Seemed like the thought had never even crossed her mind. I don't think she actually realised how much of a pain she was being to other people. The thing is though, one night I got a call from her while I was chilling by myself watching the TV. I rolled over on my bed towards my phone. Someone like you isn't my boyfriend. You're not my boyfriend, right? Suddenly, out of the blue, a cold-hearted question, and not even a good evening. I could almost feel my blood boil. How could she change her mind like that so quickly, and why did she have to be so rude all the time? I was about to scream back at her, when I stopped. I realised this was strange, even for her. Also, I couldn't help but notice her voice wasn't as strong and loud as usual. It was perhaps even slightly timid, as if she had just been frightened out of her life seconds before. But when I asked her, "Did something happen? Are you alright?" she just ignored me and asked the same question again. "You're not my boyfriend, right? You'd never be my boyfriend." She just kept on trying to get me to confirm that we aren't dating anymore. This confused me. Then it hit me. She must have been cheating on me. The guy she was cheating on me with must have caught on to the fact that she was dating two guys. Suspicious, he must have pressured her into calling me. It all made sense, and it made me flare up again. I built up a bloodthirsty rage within me. The bitch had not only been annoying and behaving completely inappropriately, but now she was cheating on me too. I shouted into the phone as loud as I could so the guy next to her would hear. "I am your boyfriend. I am your boyfriend, and we've always been dating." Silence. She didn't reply to that. I was about to open my mouth again when there suddenly was a massive cracking sound on the other end of the phone. Then the line went dead. I tried to call back again, but it seemed like she'd turned off her phone. It wasn't long until I regretted what I'd done. There was a possibility that the guy around her place might have lost it in rage just as I had. If she ended up being beaten up by him, it would have been my fault. I tried to put the possibility out of my mind, but I just couldn't sleep. I decided in the end to check out if she was okay. I looked up the train times on my phone, but it was already 2 in the morning at that point. No trains and no buses. I didn't live in the city, and it would be difficult getting hold of a taxi at this time too. So even though it would likely take me at least 45 minutes to get there, I got on my bike and furiously pedalled down the road as fast as I could. Thinking back, this long journey is what saved my skin. After all, it would have already been too late, however quickly I had arrived. By the time I got there, the noise of ambulance sirens and police cars was filling up the neighbourhood. Her body was in tatters. Her legs and her right arm were broken, and her face had swollen up with bruises and cuts, to the point that her face was almost unrecognisable. Apparently, the person living next door in her apartment had heard a scream at around 1 in the morning. He'd knocked on her door, but there had been no reply. It had an auto-lock system and couldn't be opened without a key from the outside. By the time the police had been summoned and the door broken down, she was completely lifeless. The culprit had been careful not to leave any evidence behind, and I was taken into custody as the most likely suspect. But I was soon released after there being witnesses who had seen me leave my apartment when the murder happened. My apartment was very cheap, being a uni student, and had thin walls. Apparently, my next door neighbours had heard me clatter about outside as I unlocked my bicycle. Thinking it was strange that I was heading out at this time, they peeped outside to take a look without me noticing. given the time I was seen at my apartment and when the murder occurred, it was obvious that I could not be the murderer. I think the girl's family still blames me for her murder. After all, I am an obvious culprit, and I was seen at the scene of the crime soon after the incident. Then again, I suppose they're right. In a way, I am the murderer. It's kind of surprising, but I don't really feel too bad about it though. I think the world is a better place with her gone.
Lost property. This is a story about something which happened to me a while back when I was still going to university. It's pretty long, but please, listen. It was quite a long time ago, but I still remember it clearly. It all started when I went to a department store nearby my house. I'd finished shopping and was sitting outside the store for a cigarette. While I was sitting down, for no particular reason, my line of sight fell on the trash can next to me. It was basically empty and very clean, but at the bottom, there was a cheap-looking cell phone. I picked it up out of the bin and took a look at it. It was completely broken. I was about to throw it back into the bin when I noticed there was an SD card slot. When I peered inside, I found that there was still an SD card lodged inside the phone. Bingo! I quickly pocketed the SD card and threw away the broken phone. Being a student, I had no money at the time. I didn't have an SD card on my phone, and if it fitted, it could be very useful. Once I was back at my university accommodation, I inserted the SD card into my PC. There were around 100 pictures in the card. I was hoping there may be some interesting photos in the card, like maybe some porno pictures. As I started flicking through, I was disappointed. There wasn't anything interesting about the photos. Mainly, the pictures were of a young girl and a woman. I assumed the woman was her mom. There were also pictures of Tokyo and Fukuoka, another Japanese city. Perhaps the father had taken them on some kind of business trip, since the girl and woman were nowhere to be found in the photos of Fukuoka. I was beginning to get bored when I hit the jackpot. It was a picture of a woman with very long hair in a dark room. She had her back towards the camera. I was excited, as the woman was completely naked. Ecstatic like a schoolboy, I quickly clicked on the next picture on the camera roll. I froze. In the picture, the woman was still in the same room, and now staring at the camera. But only her face was looking at me. Her neck had twisted 180 degrees to stare at me, but her body was still facing away from the camera as before. It reminded me of a scene from The Exorcist. Her face was also strange. The woman had no eyes. Where her eyes should have been, all there was skin. It was as if the woman naturally never had eyes in the first place. I was creeped out, but clicked to view the next photo anyway. It was most likely some kind of Photoshop. I mean, who the hell believes in ghosts in this day and age, after all? But the next photo was blacked out. I clicked on a few more, but all of them were the same. There was nothing, just darkness. I decided to think of it as a prank, that the person who'd taken the photos was just messing around. Maybe he was planning to use the photos to scare his friends. So, ignoring the pictures, I decided to format the SD card and delete all the photos. When I clicked the format button, however, suddenly all the lights in my house went out. I live in an apartment by myself and have been living here for the past 2 years while I've been attending university. But this had never happened before. It was 10 o'clock at night, but it wasn't completely pitch black as I had the light from my PC. When I looked out of the window, the 7-Eleven convenience store outside still had its lights on, so I knew it wasn't a power cut. I figured it was the breaker, and I was just about to go to the kitchen when suddenly it happened. I heard a sound. The kind of sound high heels make when they hit the floor. My heart skipped a beat. No way. It couldn't be. I was the only one who lived in the apartment. I told myself I was imagining things. I picked up my PC to use as a light and shuffled towards the kitchen. But in that instant, the same sound came again, and this time louder and faster. The sound was so clear that I realized it couldn't be a figment of my imagination. This was real. I screamed as loud as I could and ran towards the kitchen. As I did, I heard footsteps behind me. I was half in tears when I reached the kitchen. I found the breaker and flicked the switch, terrified for what I would find. I braced myself. As the lights flickered on, I looked around me, but there was nothing. I fell into a chair, scared shitless. I must have been imagining it, but the sound was so real. I was about to get up when the TV switched on at max volume. Petrified, I looked at the TV. I hadn't had the TV on when the breaker went down. I cautiously moved toward the TV and switched it off. As I half fell onto my bed, I realized I was still clutching the PC with my hands. On the screen, there was a message saying that the SD card had finished formatting. For some reason, I sensed the whole ordeal was over, and I relaxed. I decided to go to sleep, but with the lights on, as I was still a little afraid. I don't know how long I slept, but I felt kind of sick and woke up in the middle of the night. I was also finding it difficult to breathe. It was pitch black, and I instinctively reached for the light, but I realized in the process that I had left the lights on before going to sleep. As I lay there trying to go back to sleep, suddenly I heard a scuttling sound in the room. It sounded like a cockroach or some kind of large insect. My heart started to beat fast, but I was too terrified to move. I decided just to try and go back to sleep. The sound seemed to get louder and louder, and as it did, I felt something brush against my face. With disbelief, I realized it was hair. Long hair. Then suddenly, right next to my ear, I heard a cold whisper, so close that I could feel a breath. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" It was a very quiet voice, but had a murderous intent. I think it must have been a woman's voice. I didn't dare to even breathe. As I lay there, playing dead, the scuttling sound gradually faded away into silence. When I woke the next morning, relieved that I was still breathing, I was greeted with another shock. As I looked into the mirror, I noticed my face had swollen up. All over my face there were pimples. No, they were too small to be simple spots. My face was covered in warts. I couldn't go to university in the state I was in. I decided to take the day off and go to the hospital. To arrange an appointment, I sat down and opened up my PC before heading to the hospital, and to my horror, despite deleting all the data on the SD card, all the photos were back, just as they were before. I knew I shouldn't, but I checked the photos, and sure enough, there was the woman with skin for eyes. As I stared at the black photograph from before, I realized that actually there was a sliver of light in the photo. I flicked through the other black photos and saw the same thing. In all the photos there was a flicker of light, a really thin line of light. Using Photoshop, I tried changing the brightness of the photo and zoomed in on the picture. That was when it hit me. It was hair. There was hair wrapped around the lens. That's why there was slivers of light shining in through the black photographs. When the thought occurred to me, I was creeped out and decided to go to the local secondhand electrical goods store to sell the SD card before I went to the hospital. I wanted to get rid of the SD card as soon as possible, so I left the apartment and ran there as fast as I could. When I got back to my apartment, it was almost midday. I packed a few things and was about to leave for the hospital when I saw my reflection in the mirror of the hallway. The warts and pimples had disappeared. My face was completely back to normal. Since then, I haven't heard strange noises in my room and have no problems with my face swelling up or with warts. But sometimes, I still find long strands of black hair in my room. Karma. A story my mom told me when she was drunk out of her mind. In the unlikely event of me going back home to visit the family, my mom would reward me with interesting stories based on her past experiences. Seems a bit lame looking forward to stories your mom tells you, right? But you'll understand me once you've heard one of her stories. Her stories are always a bit unbelievable. Something out of the ordinary happens. When I ask her if they're true, she assures me they are, but that's something for you to decide. At the time, my mom was still a student, a hard thing to picture for me. Her hobby had always been to draw, and being at university, she had joined a arts society. The scene sets at a society party during her third year at university. Drinking being her favorite hobby of all, she was quietly sitting in the corner of the izakaya, quietly getting drunk without a word. As she drank, out of the blue, a first-year student who was obviously intoxicated too, sat next to her. The fresher agreed with her that she liked to drink but didn't like the atmosphere of the party. They immediately hit it off. While drinking, both of them introduced themselves to each other. Surprisingly, the first year revealed that she was actually the same age as my mom. She'd repeated her final year twice to study for university exams. Let's call the girl Nicola. Nicola was drinking whiskey on the rocks. She called over the waiter and told him to bring all the whiskey they had. Soon, the table was full of empty glasses and bottles. Even my mom was taken aback by the amount the girl drank and told her to stop. Not paying any heed to my mom's words, she continued to down the half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels. After drinking every last drop, she slammed the bottle down on the table and sighed. My mom handed her a glass of water, but she pushed it away immediately. She then proceeded to say one of the weirdest things my mom had ever heard in her lifetime. "Please, keep that water away from me, senpai. Water kills me." Even being drunk, it seemed a bit weird saying something that extraordinary to someone she just met. My mom figured she was a bit of a weirdo, but asked all the same. "Why does water kill you?" This is where the story gets weird. Nicola explained that during her younger years at high school, she spent a majority of her free time bullying a certain student. The student was a transfer student from another school. She looked very rugged and poor. She also smelled kind of funny. Most likely she'd transferred due to her dad losing her job or something along those lines. At the beginning, Nicola had not thought anything of the kid. Sure, she dressed funny, but so did a lot of others at her age. The problem started when the transfer student got the best mark in all curricula for the midterm exams. Up until then, Nicola had been the one that was the cleverest in the school. She was supposed to be the prettiest, the cleverest, the most popular. It was unacceptable that this nobody from nowhere beat her. After that, a group of 3 girls, including Nicola, started to bully the poor child. They insulted her about the fact that she was poor, called her rude names, wrote on her desk, the standard things you would expect from bullying at that age. The kid just kept enduring and didn't retaliate. She probably knew that it wouldn't do any good. It was around 4 months since she transferred over to Nicola's school when her father died. She was off school for 2 weeks, but when she returned, it was as if nothing had happened. That annoyed Nicola even more. Whatever happened to her, whatever she did to her, she wasn't fazed. It made her want to bully her even more. "Your dad's died and you don't even care," Nicola screamed. "You're a heartless, cold-blooded monster." The bullying continued to escalate week by week. It was nearing the winter holidays when one of Nicola's bullying companions came up with a plan. "Listen, Nicola, I've found the grave where the bitch's dad's buried. Let's go up to the grave and mess it up. If we dig his grave up, it's bound to rile that kid up." A terrible scheme, but Nicola congratulated her friend for her stroke of genius. So, later that day, Nicola and her 2 friends went to the father's grave. They dug up soil, kicked the gravestone, and drew over it with permanent marker. When she said that, my mom told me her view of Nicola completely changed. She'd felt sick. Bullying is bad enough, but humiliating the dead was something that couldn't be forgiven, even if they were just children who didn't know any better. Seeming to understand my mom's thoughts, the fresher student had lowered her hidden shame. "I know. I did a terrible thing." But the story becomes even more tragic. It was as they were violating the grave that the transfer student came running to stop them in tears. She'd been tipped off by one of the students in the class who had overheard the trio discussing their evil plan. When she saw the damage that had been done to the grave, she fell to her knees. Sobbing, she asked Nicola, "Why are you doing this to me and my father? What have I done to you to deserve this?" It being the first time the girl had stood up to them, this annoyed Nicola to the point of madness. Without being able to hold back, she charged at the girl and sent her flying backwards. She stumbled back and fell, hitting her head against her father's tombstone. She seemed to lose consciousness as she stopped moving entirely. The 3 girls gasped, thinking that they'd killed her. They were about to make a run for it when the girl suddenly got up as if nothing had happened. Looking down at the ground intently, it was as if she was in a sort of trance, when suddenly she reared up her head to look at Nicola with wide, bloodshot eyes. She then proceeded to point at each of the girls and said, "You will die by fire. You will die by iron. You will die by water." And then silence. Not another word. The girl turned her back to them and walked off. Nicola was stunned. Neither of the 3 bullies spoke a word. There was something sinister in the manner the girl spoke, and a strange fear had spread all over Nicola's body. Ever since then, Nicola stopped hanging with the 2 other girls and stopped bullying the girl. She made sure to avoid her as much as possible, out of fright. That being said, it wasn't long until she completely forgot about the incident, being busy with exams and her love affairs. This was also combined with the fact that the transfer student moved away again soon after the incident. It was 2 years later, when studying for her university finals, that Nicola heard about the other girls' deaths. They had been in a car accident on their way to Disney Sea Resort. Having known them since childhood, she felt obliged to go to their funeral, despite the weighing stress of exams. Given how friendly the 2 were, they were given a joint funeral at a temple. Their parents had both said, this is what they would have wanted. Together in life and together in death? Quite amusing. Nicola sat at the temple in prayer with all the other family and friends. As she sat there kneeling, she heard a few of the relatives near her who were chatting over the ceremony. I heard she was unrecognizable when she was finally dragged out from the car. She apparently had so many burns over her body that even the police threw up. I heard that the other girl was in a terrible mess too. Apparently she was the driver. She had a massive shard of metal shoved straight through her stomach. A shiver went up Nicola's spine. What was this? Was she forgetting something? It was then that she remembered the words the girl had said all those years ago. One will die by fire. One will die by iron, and one will die by... Nicola interrupted the story to take another swig from the whiskey bottle. With bloodshot eyes, she continued to explain to my mother that she avoided water as much as possible due to her fear for what the girl had said that day, that she would die by water. She went on to say that she'd repeated her final 2 years due to her being too afraid to leave her room and attend school. She'd become a complete hikikomori. It was only after these 2 years, when she was sure that it had simply been a coincidence, that she came out of her house and headed back to school. My mom was at a loss for words and just gulped, but Nicola seemed to be unfazed. She continued to smarmily tell my mother that she took every precaution to avoid water wherever she was. She never visited aquariums or hot springs. She even made sure to use the minimum amount of water in showers and never took baths. "There's no possible way that I could die by water," she said triumphantly. That was as far as my mom told me in regards to Nicola's tale. It was getting late and she told me she needed to sleep. She shooed me away. But I couldn't let her stop there. I had to ask one more question or I wouldn't be able to get to sleep out of curiosity. "So what happened to Nicola in the end?" I told her. My mom paused and then took a sip from her glass. She died," she shrugged. Apparently, she'd become ill and died a few months after she'd first talked to her at the izakaya. Word on the wind had been that it was liver cirrhosis. My mom continued. "When I met her, she was really pale. Her skin was also slightly yellow. Her excessive drinking must have been to keep her fear of death at bay." She finished her glass of whiskey. I suppose one could say that she really did die from water.
My sweet grandmother. I had loved my grandmother ever since I was little. Even when I was in high school, I continued to go and play around my grandparents' house. My father, and incidentally my grandmother's son, had died when I was still young. She had looked after me all the time when I was young, as my mother was always out of house with work. My grandfather had also died at quite a young age, and as one of the only blood relations left, she was always kind to me. Sadly, this could not also be said about the relationship between my mother and grandmother. My mother couldn't stand her, and she would not even visit her house. Ever since I was young, it had become a sort of tradition for me and my grandmother to go to the local temple to go and pray every Sunday morning. My grandmother was an avid believer in the Shinto religion, and even when it rained or snowed, she would always visit the temple. Although I was not such a strong believer in religion, I loved going to visit the temple with my grandma and would accompany her most weekends. I would finish praying after 30 seconds, but my grandma would pray in front of the temple for at least 10 minutes. She would close her eyes and concentrate intently on her prayer. I would always stare at her as she prayed, and I would also always ask, "What were you praying for today, Grandma?" But she would just smile and never answer. The story changes topic a bit here, but ever since I was little I had always been a sickly child. I was sick often and would have to be off school at least every month, and I would have trouble sleeping also. When it was bad, I was unable to even have 4 hours of sleep a day. The doctors had never been able to diagnose the illness. They speculated that it was caused by an allergic reaction to something that they could simply not identify. This was given that along with my sickness and insomnia, I was also subject to cramps in my stomach, swelling in my arms and legs, and many spots on my face. The sickness and insomnia became so bad when I was 15 that I actually was nearly subject to multiple accidents due to fainting in public. I was forced to go off school for 3 months. It was during that time that I would stay around my grandma's house. She would hold my hand tightly as I was in bed, doing some praying as she normally did at the temple. However, despite all of my grandmother's efforts, the sickness got worse and worse. I started to become physically sick, and the rashes and spots on my body got even worse. I lost a lot of weight simply because I couldn't hold in any food in my stomach. It got to the point that I was so distressed and in pain that I tried to commit suicide. But I must have been holding back when I attempted. I suppose I was still a chicken. Whatever I did, I would survive. If I tried to slit my wrists, it wasn't deep enough. If I tried to hang myself, the rope would break. Nothing worked. However, it was only then that fate decided to throw me into the epitome of despair. One day when I was in hospital, I received a message from my mum that my grandmother had passed away. Flaying around, sobbing, I screamed to a non-existent God in anguish. What had I done in my life to deserve this? After I was out of hospital, I locked myself in my grandma's house and refused to talk to anybody. I didn't even go to school for 3 weeks. It was only when my mother physically tried to drag me out the house that I first breathed the outside air. But this was when something strange happened. As my mother tried to drag me out the house, I refused to leave and pushed her over, sending her flying backwards. Can you see what was strange? I was actually able to push someone over. 3 weeks ago, I had been so weak that I could barely lift an orange to my mouth in the hospital bed. How could I possibly have enough strength to push over a fully grown, healthy woman? In the bright sunlight, I removed my shirt to see that there were no rashes on my body anymore. I felt my face to find no spots either. I hadn't noticed due to my sorrow, but had also been eating and sleeping fine these past couple of weeks. I realised at that point it must have been my grandma. She must have gone to heaven, taking all my pain and suffering with her. Tears welled to my eyes, half due to the brightness of the sun in my eyes and half due to my joy. It had been another 2 years since my grandmother had died. I was now 17 and had been going to school without a single day off ever since that day. I was so full of vigour that I was able to do a part-time job whilst keeping up to speed with my studies. Given that there was no need for the house anymore, despite sentiment, it was decided that my grandmother's house would be sold. Besides, I had no voice in the matter. The house didn't belong to me. No one but me had any interest in my grandmother's belongings, so it was decided that everything in the house would be dumped after I had looked through all of her stuff. It was when I was looking through my grandmother's cupboard that I found a huge wooden box. As I opened it, I found it to be full of diaries that my grandmother had kept over her entire life. I turned over the first diary. What I found to be a surprise was that the start date on the front cover of the diary was from the same date when her son, or my dad, had died. I flicked open the pages. What I read changed me forever. Apparently, my dad hadn't died of a car accident. It had been a suicide. And the cause was my mother having an affair with multiple other men. But it wasn't this that completely destroyed me. A shiver ran down my spine. The diary was full of rage. Rage directed at me. I found out that I was not my father's child, but one of the many men my mother had played around with. I suppose he must have committed suicide when he found out that I wasn't his child. My grandma blamed me for her son's death. I understood now why she went to the temple every week, even when it rained or snowed. She had been pleading the gods to kill me.
The Mirror. This is a story I heard from a girlfriend of mine. I don't mean girlfriend as in lover. I just mean a friend of mine who's a female. I've changed a few bits to give nothing about her away. The last thing I want would be for her to be tracked down because of this story. But this is a true one. Alice had an older sister who was 3 years older than she was. They got along well, particularly given that Alice got a lot of help from her sister in life, in regards to exams, her boyfriend, driving test, and anything else. That night, her older sister had just got out of the bath, and along with both her parents, the whole family were together, chatting in the living room. It was getting late, and after around half an hour of chatting, Alice's sister went upstairs to her bedroom. Alice was about to go shower too when she heard her sister's door close. She decided to go ask her advice regarding exams before she went to sleep. Alice thumped up the stairs to her sister's room and, without knocking, slammed open the door as she normally did. Her sister was facing the mirror with her back towards the door. She was in the midst of combing her hair. Alice was about to open her mouth to ask her a question about math when she was sharply interrupted by her sister. "Sorry, Alice. I don't know why you came in, but could you go and buy me some moisturizer from the convenience store?" Alice puffed up. "The convenience store? But that's a 15-minute walk away." This was strange. It wasn't like her sister to ask her for errands suddenly, particularly in the dead of night. "Well, I'm always helping you out, so can you do me a favor sometimes too? If you're scared, you can take Dad or your boyfriend with you." Her sister actually seemed a bit annoyed. Alice sighed. "All right, sis. Just make sure you're still conscious when I get back." Her sister smiled in the mirror. Okay. Get going now, quickly." She never saw her sister alive again. When she got back from the convenience store, she found the house door wide open. Her father was sprawled across the floor at the bottom of the stairs, covered in blood, with a knife stuck in his stomach. Her mother was crying and screaming into the phone, trying to call an ambulance. Her sister's stalker had snuck in earlier during the day and had been hiding in her room. Hearing the screams, her father had tried to stop the man and ended up being stabbed as a result. Alice's father somehow survived after being sent to a hospital right away, but her sister was long gone by the time Alice got back from the convenience store. Through the mirror, her sister must have seen the stalker looking in the closet next to her room's entrance. She'd sent Alice on an errand to avoid her being attacked too. The stalker still hasn't been caught, even to this day. The Pervert. Something that happened to my friend. Let's call her Rebecca. Rebecca was living in this little apartment which was extremely cheap. Why was it so cheap, you ask? Well, it was easy to tell when you visited the place. The building was just too old. This wasn't a problem in itself, since the upkeep of the building had been perfect. However, what it did mean was that the building was lacking security. There was no auto lock, reinforced windows, and if someone tried to break in, it wouldn't be that difficult. Rebecca wasn't particularly popular as girls went, but she was pretty, and I told her repeatedly that she had to be more careful as she was living by herself. The room she was living in itself was a really nice place, so I suppose that's why she didn't want to leave. Thanks to her carelessness, I ended up getting the biggest fright of my life. It was Rebecca's birthday, and as a surprise, I dropped by her room suddenly to give her a present. As I was chilling in her room, my line of sight drifted lazily around. Although the room was nice, when observing closely, you could see that the building was old after all. There was new wallpaper, so the walls were clean, but you could see stains on the ceiling. You could also see the closet doors were rather dirty. It was then that I decided to suddenly grab Rebecca by the arm, whilst she was in the middle of cooking, and drag her out of the room. Maybe I'm being a bit confusing here, but bear with me. Only after leaving the room and distancing ourselves away from the apartment premises did I stop to explain the situation to the angrily protesting Rebecca. As I was staring at the closet in Rebecca's room, I'd noticed a slight movement in the door, a slight vibration, as if something had just lightly brushed against it. Not thinking anything of it at first, I paid no attention. But as I lay there, bored, I realized I could also faintly hear the sound of breathing coming from inside. There was obviously some kind of creepy stalker hiding inside the closet. Most likely he was waiting for me to return home, and then he planned to pounce on Rebecca as she slept. He must have been able to break in easily, since there wasn't even the slightest trace of someone attempting to break and enter into her room. When I had realized this, I thought I was going to wet myself. I was about to scream, but considering the stalker's reaction and the possibility of him holding a weapon, I silently grabbed Rebecca's arm and dragged her out of the room. In this kind of situation, the best thing to do is to rely on the police. But here's the weird thing. As I hysterically explained to her the situation, Rebecca just laughed. She told me there was no guarantee that there was a man hiding in the closet. It could have just been my imagination, or maybe a cat had somehow gotten into her room. Besides, she argued, there was no guarantee that if a person was hiding inside her room, that he or she would be dangerous. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Indeed, it could be possible that my mind was playing tricks on me. But what if I was right? What if there really was a dangerous stalker hiding in the closet and preparing for an attack? Did Rebecca have no sense of danger? She told me that she didn't want to make a fuss unnecessarily, so she didn't want to call the police. We dealt with the situation by getting a few of the guys living next door to help out. By the time we got back to her room and checked the closet, there was nobody there. I guess the stalker must have realized something was up and made a swift escape before he was caught. Scary to think how close the situation was to going extremely bad. But you know what's even more insane? Rebecca's still living in that same room. She hasn't budged despite all my protesting. I told this story to my friends, but they just laugh at me. I wonder why.
Reverse stalking. I'm a stalker. I'm not proud of it, but that's what a human would describe me as. There's this girl I've been following back from the station to her house for the last month. The first time I met her was on the train, or should I say the first time I saw her was on the train. She had long black hair and brown eyes. She didn't wear much makeup, but she was still the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. She gave no sign of noticing me. Seeing her get off at the station just before mine, as if in a trance, I followed her, like a bee attracted to nectar. Following through past the station to the high street, then through the residential streets, she finally reached her destination. She didn't live in a particularly busy area, and the roads were dimly lit. The darkness provided a perfect cover for me to stalk her. But I still watched from afar, keeping a distance of 30 meters away from her just in case. I'd seen what could happen to male stalkers who got caught up in Japan. Spying from behind a tree next to her apartment, I saw the girl walk up the stairs to the second floor. As she opened the door and switched the hall light on, I could see the room number. Room number 5, I mumbled to myself. I've been stalking her every day since. Well anyway, I've been keeping this up for the last month. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a creep. I haven't played any tricks or done anything to her. All I've done is to watch her from a safe distance. I haven't touched her. Japanese trains are hardly ever late, and so she would always get off at the station at the same time. She would always buy the same thing from the same convenience store and walk back the same route back home. It was like she was a machine. She always reached her home at exactly the same time. It was the same that night as well. She reached her apartment at 8:25, only 5 minutes off her average. As I did every day, I silently whispered, "Good night, sweetie," and I turned to head back home. It was roughly a 15-minute walk back to the station, but it was winter and the snow was heavy. It had taken us twice the normal amount of time to get back to her apartment. Shivering, I trudged through the snow. I needed to buy myself a coat, but with my pay, it was impossible. It was as I was about to reach the convenience store that I heard a strange sound behind me. Footsteps. How could that be? I thought to myself. I had walked back this way every single day for the past month. There were never any other pedestrians at this time. I stopped and looked behind me, but as I stared into the darkness, all I could hear was the sound of icy wind blowing against my face. Shivering again, I turned around. But as I started to walk, trudge, 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 someone was following me. Frightened, I ran as fast as I could back to the station, and looking frantically around me as I boarded the train, I saw no one following me. It was roughly 9:30 when I finally got back home that night. I had gone to work early that day at around 5 in the morning to rehearse a presentation for an early morning meeting with the team. I was shattered, and without cooking or washing, I fell straight to bed. I must have slept for around 30 minutes when a deafening crashing sound seemed to erupt all around the room. At the same time, I felt a large pain to my forehead as if something had crashed into it. I woke up instantly. Panicking, I reached for my baseball bat and swung it around the room blindly. Something was in my eyes and I couldn't see properly. Had someone tried to break in? Eventually I calmed down, and coming to my senses I stared around the room to see what had happened. My window had been smashed. Looking around the floor, I soon found what had caused the damage. A stone. It was the size of my fist. Picking up the stone, I realised it was wet. Wet with my blood. Instinctively, I touched my forehead and winced. Blood was trickling down my face from a gash in my head. It was the blood in my eyes that had blinded me, but the wound didn't seem to be that deep. Wrapping a bandage around my forehead, I fearfully peered outside the broken window to see who had caused the damage. She was wearing a pair of red boots and a white coat. I suppose I hadn't seen her wear it before, as it was too snazzy for work. She moved her black hair out of her face and smiled at me. She shouted up, "You're mine." The girl I had been stalking had stalked me back to my house. From that day on, she's been stalking me every single day. Every day as I get off at my home station, I hear the same relentless footsteps trudging behind me. It's like she isn't even trying to be conspicuous. She's deliberately trying to agitate me. I truly regret stalking the girl. I didn't realise how scary it could be when you were stalked yourself. Even after I've entered my room, she stands outside, waiting, sometimes peering through my window with a malicious grin. Sometimes she waits for me to fall asleep, then rattles the doorknob to wake me up. She also leaves messages in my front door saying she's going to hurt me and torture me in my sleep. I got a DVD from her, which included plenty of footage of me stalking her. She had set up secret video cameras on the way back to her house. She'd set me up completely. Calling the police on her would only incriminate me, not her. Maybe this had been her plan all along. Or maybe she's just crazy. I think I should just call the police. At least in prison, I can get a good night's sleep.
My last affair. I'm married. But like most married couples I know, there's no fire, no love between us. I like her as a friend and companion, but I have no feelings towards her as a member of the opposite sex. I believe the feeling is mutual. Once you've been married for enough years, sooner or later, the feeling of affection you once felt fades away into nothing. If you've ever been or are married, I'm sure you understand me, even though you don't want to admit it. For those who aren't married, well, maybe you'll find out in the future. Then again, don't let what I say get in the way of what you want to do. I'm only speaking from my experience. And besides, it's not like I'm saying marriage is necessarily a bad thing. But what I am saying is that cheating on your wife is only natural. Her name was Yuki. I really loved her. True love, unlike what I felt towards my wife. Yuki was great. She had no wish to get married or live with me. She was the same as me. She just wanted to be free to do what she wanted and when she wanted. I wanted to be with her as much as possible. When I was with her, I could forget all about my troubles at work. She was okay with me having a wife and kids. Notice the past tense. Was. I've never understood how a woman's mind works. The longer I dated her, what she truly felt started to spurt out all over the beautiful white canvas which was our relationship, painting it black, blue, and red, making it needlessly complicated and ruining something which was just so perfect. Apparently, she actually wanted to marry me. She wanted me to get divorced. She wanted kids. She wanted me all to herself. I did love the girl, I honestly did, but at the same time I didn't want a complicated relationship. We were just sex friends, that was it. I'll be honest with you, when a man tells a girl that he loves them, what it means 99% of the time is that he just wants a fuck. It doesn't mean anything else. Nothing more, nothing less. If things start to get complicated, it wasn't worth seeing her anymore. I couldn't risk losing my house and family to a temporary love affair. So, I forcefully split up with Yuki. I told her we needed to stop dating. Then I blocked her on Facebook. The end. It was 1 month after we'd split up that I got a text from Yuki. "It's been a while," it read. I wouldn't have bothered replying, except there was a picture attached to the message. It was beautifully taken and starred Yuki. She was smiling angelically and appeared to be waving to me through the photo. She was so beautiful. If only she hadn't gone all crazy on me. I considered again if there was any possible way for it to work between us, but it was impossible. Unless we moved to a distant country which accepted dual marriage. My God, though, she was hot. It was as I looked at the photo, however, that I felt a chill run through my spine. I instinctively seemed to know that there was something eerie, something horribly wrong about the photo. My body seemed to know, but my mind just couldn't comprehend what was wrong. I transferred the photo she'd sent me from my phone to my work PC to take a closer look at the photo. Maximizing the photo viewer, I realized what the problem was. I knew this place. Yuki was standing in a park which was located right next to my flat. I'd never given away my exact location just in case. Was this simply a coincidence? But as I looked at the photo even closer, I realized this was wishful thinking. Far in the distance behind the smiling Yuki were my children. They seemed to be playing in the sandbox, blissfully unaware of the nearby danger. Terrified, I immediately called back Yuki. I apologized and begged her to forgive me. She just laughed and told me, "You're never going to leave me, you fool. Try this shit again, and I'll kill your kids." There's no escape from her. I should have realized that since at first I'd slept with her. I might as well have signed a contract with the devil himself. I can't escape. Please, can someone help me? Hi, nice to meet you. I'm a nurse. So there's this question us doctors and nurses get asked frequently. The question is, what's the thing you regret the most about becoming a doctor? What would you expect the answer to be? I asked this question to my friends and family. What do you think the answer is? Most of them seem to think that we hate the long hours and terrible sleeping patterns. But that's not true. It's amazing what humans can get used to. What do you think it is? Well, I'll tell you. When you become a doctor, you start to realize that doctors really don't care about their patients at all. Most of them only care about how much money they earn or about their career. What do you hate the most about your profession? I used to work in the terminal ward. Not many doctors around, mainly just nurses. Most of the patients were old, many of them half senile. I had this patient I was particularly fond of. The man would always walk around the ward and talk to other patients and nurses. Really nice guy. Even though he was very ill himself, he would always cheer up new patients who entered the ward. I felt bad for the guy. He was so nice, but he was going to die at the ripe age of 34. One day, one of my colleagues is helping a family get over their grandmother's death. A nice old lady who'd been in the ward for roughly 6 months. She'd passed away peacefully overnight. The family had gathered around her body, which was still on the hospital bed of her room. So, anyway, the guy didn't tell me how he noticed, but he notices a little prick at the back of a dead patient's ear. Thinking it strange, he looks at some other dead patients in the morgue and notices the same prick on other patients. Turns out, the nice and cheerful man who had helped so many others in the hospital had been killing terminally ill patients, mostly very old ones who were on the verge of death. But he was murdering them all the same. We'd never found out about it as no one ever did a full body check of the dead bodies in the terminal ward. After all, we were expecting them to die soon, and the reason of death was pretty clear. Why would we bother? I never found out why the man did this. Maybe he was just terrified of death. He killed many of the patients and watched them die to see what would happen. He wanted to see what would happen to him, to see what happens when people die. Or maybe he was just angry that he was dying at such a young age. He wanted to kill as many people as he could before he died himself. I could imagine him asking the patients as they died, "What does it feel like? Does it hurt?" He didn't even have time to go to court. He died 2 weeks after. What do you hate the most about your profession. Since I've started working as a nurse, I can't trust people. Full stop. A Yakuza encounter. This taught me a while back an important life lesson. Don't fuck with the Yakuza. I work in retail. I was coming back after a trip to my client's office when I end up at this massive traffic jam. The traffic seems to continue till a train crossing. The guys who had planned the roads here hadn't done a good job. There's this big black car far in front of me which is slow in crossing. They don't make it and end up being stuck again as another train arrives. A man driving a white Mercedes behind the black car in front starts getting angry. He beeps his horn and shouts out to the slow car in front, "You fucking idiot! What are you playing at?" That kind of thing. So this guy comes out of the black car in front. He seems like a normal dude. In fact, he was quite skinny. He's dressed in a black suit. The only problem was, he's got a golf club in his hand. As he steps out, someone else dressed in black steps out of the car. The guy behind them starts to look pale. He closes his car window and cowers back in his car. But it's too late. He's pissed off the wrong people. Without a word, the two guys dressed in black drag the guy out of the car. They then proceed to beat the shit out of him with golf clubs. The guy's rolling on the floor, crying and sobbing, blood gushing out of his face and head. The thin man steps on his left hand, and I can hear the cracking sound as he smashes his knuckle bones into pieces. They pay no attention to what the man is saying. Eventually, the man becomes silent, and the men return to their car. The train leaves, and they drive off, like nothing had happened. Me and the rest of the drivers are left behind, mouths open wide, shitting ourselves quietly. I guess they must have been Yakuza. A story about a hikikomori. We have too many hikikomoris in Japan. These are guys who lock themselves in their rooms and refuse to talk to the outside world. Sometimes, even their own families. But people don't become a hikikomori because they want to. They become a hikikomori because they're forced to. This is about a guy I used to know when I was younger. I'm not being biased when I say, this guy was a nice guy. I met him when I was around 6 years old. We even used to go to the same kindergarten. He was a scrawny kid, unsocial. I guess it was inevitable that he would end up getting bullied all the time. After having been beaten up roughly when we were 14, he eventually stopped going to our school. Maybe I could have done more to help, but I was just a weak little kid at the time too. I hadn't wanted to get bullied either. Besides, we hadn't been that amazing of friends anyway. Anyway, I'm 24 now and I'm working for this big firm after leaving university. I've been away from home for about a year and I hadn't managed to go home even once in the year I started working because I was just too busy. Maybe I just couldn't be bothered. Probably the latter. I walk out of the station and I start the 15-minute walk to my parents' house. I'd come down after finishing work and it was now pretty late. I think it was around 10 p.m. at that point. I'd come after eating dinner, but I felt a little peckish, so I dropped by the local 7-Eleven, which was between the station and my parents' place. I take a bit of a detour and find the 7-Eleven I always used to visit so often as a kid. I actually sighed in relief when I saw the shop. In Japan, shops close and pop up all the time. I wouldn't have been surprised if 7-Eleven would have closed their branch in a shitty, unpopulated area like this. These days, I always look at my phone wherever and whatever time, mainly due to work. But I'm also obsessed with this mobile game called Shadowverse at the moment. So, I admit what happened next was completely my fault. I walk into the 7-Eleven, or try to walk into the 7-Eleven while looking at my phone, and I bump into this guy who was just leaving. I wasn't paying attention at all, and I go spiraling onto the pavement behind me. I hit my back, hard. Groaning, I lay there for a second and looked at my phone lying next to me. It had a little scratch, but no crack. Phew, it was fine. As I'm there lying on the floor like an idiot, the guy I bump into gives me his hand. He very timidly asks, "Are you all right?" This guy helps me up to my feet and I apologize, telling him it's completely my fault for not looking where I was going. The man seemed to be quite a few years older than me and had a rather untamed beard. Not very sexually appealing. It was as if he couldn't be bothered to shave, or perhaps he had no need to shave. He was carrying a big bag full of Nissin cup noodles. In reply to my apology, he simply mumbles something and then walks past me and out the door. Sighing again, I brush dirt off my jacket and trousers. I'm about to finally walk into the shop when, suddenly, someone grabs my shoulder from behind. Surprised, I immediately swing my body around to face the entrance of the convenience store. It was that bearded guy again. He lifts his head up towards my face and looks at me as if I'm some sort of ghost. A bit scared, I ask him if everything was okay. But without answering, he runs off before I have a chance to talk to him properly. It was a few months after that I found out who the bearded man was. I was at work when I got the call from my parents. I got a bit annoyed at first that they'd called me when I was busy. They kept on calling me over and over again, and it seemed they didn't plan to stop until I answered my phone. They explained to me that it was very urgent. Do you remember the friend I mentioned at the start of this story? The hikikomori. The one who got severely bullied when we were kids? Well, he committed suicide. Around a week later, I was back in my hometown, attending the funeral. My poor friend didn't have a father, and it pained me to see his mother crying all the way through the funeral. I guess she was going to live all by herself from now on. The sad thing about suicide is that it hurts deeply everybody who had a relationship with that person. Is there something I could have done? Am I to blame? Watching the mother cry, I swore to myself I'd never do what my friend had done. Everyone took turns to give their blessings to the mother. When it was finally my turn, I was lost for words. I had no idea what to say to her. I just stood there, feeling that I should say something, but just too dumb to speak. But as I thought desperately, it was the mother that spoke to me before I had a chance to speak. "Thank you," she says to me. I shake my head. "No, you have nothing to thank me about." "No, I need to thank you. Thank you for staying in contact with my son, even after all these years." I was so confused. What was she on about? I hadn't talked to him since I was in high school. Was she confusing me with someone else? She then goes on to tell me that he'd mentioned me on the night in which he committed suicide. About how he'd chatted to me recently. He'd also asked her about what I was doing now after graduating high school. I didn't understand, but I just said, "Don't mention it," and walked past her. I then sat down in the funeral hall and waited for the ceremony to start. In Japan, they make you sit for ages in an uncomfortable position on the floor during a funeral. So to try to take my mind off the pain, I looked around at the funeral hall and at my friend's shrine, far at the front of the hall, placed in front of the Buddhist priest, as usually happens in Japanese funerals. It was at this moment that I finally understood everything. Why the mother had thought I was still close friends with her son. Why I'd been called to the funeral, even after all these years. At the front of the hall was the temporary shrine of my old friend. It was surrounded by flowers, and above it there were pictures of what he used to look like. The bearded man I'd bumped into at 7-Eleven was my friend. He must have looked much older than me due to all the stress he must have built up inside of himself after all these years. Even though in the picture he was smiling, I could see the pain in his eyes. I think he might have committed suicide because of me. The poor guy had distanced himself from all the people he used to know, everyone but his mom. I think maybe I'd been his best friend, or maybe the only friend he ever had. Having bumped into me that night, he must have pretended to still be friends with me and asked about what was going on now. Having found out that I graduated university and was now working at a large firm, he must have felt insignificant in comparison to me. After all, he hadn't even graduated high school. I suppose I could be thinking into it too much, but I can't help but feel that I'm responsible for his death as well.